identification. This is a copy of a tape made during the symposium in Hong Kong on the Holy Shroud. This lecture was on the 3rd of March 1986 at the Department of Anatomy, University of Hong Kong. It's a lecture given by Dr. John Heller and Dr. Alan Adler, and there are words of introduction at the beginning of the tape.
I must say the title of our talk this evening, Blood on the Shroud of Turin, Identification, Origin and Nature, is something of a departure from the titles of our departmental seminars too. However, for those amongst us who are scientists, I hope the nature of the subject won't suspend our scientific and critical faculties. We have a dual speaker tonight. We have two speakers, Dr. John Heller. He's a graduate of Yale, Cornell, Case Western Reserve. He's been a professor of internal medicine at Yale and of biophysics at the New England Institute, and is a consultant pathologist with a particular interest in forensics. His, I dare say fellow traveller to Americans, but I'm sure you know what I mean. His colleague is Dr. Alan Adler, now at the Department of Chemistry at Western Connecticut State University, and has qualifications from the University of Rochester and the University of Pennsylvania. He is a chemist and is especially interested in the chemistry of porphyrics. Now, both Dr. Heller and Dr. Adler are members of the Shroud of Turin research project, and they're here in Hong Kong in connection with the exhibition that was opened this morning at the Landmark. They've been, I believe, they assure me, involved in a microscopical and microchemical analysis of some of the fibres taken from the Shroud of Turin, and they have been concerned to try to determine whether some of the apparent bloodstains on the shroud were indeed stains of blood. They published their findings in the scientific literature, but I think this evening they're going to try and convince us as we sit here of their case, whether it is blood or whether it is not. So can I welcome on your behalf our two speakers, and firstly welcome Dr. John Heller, who's going to open the account.
I take it that does everybody here know what the Shroud of Turin is? Can I bypass that part? Good. I assume nobody objects. When I first became involved with this crazy project, I had never heard of the Shroud of Turin. And being a Southern Baptist, relics, as far as I was concerned, were, well, I figured if every piece of the true cross was assembled in one place, you'd have a huge lumber yard. So I clearly wasn't in the mood to buy this cloth as a burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. However, there were some very bizarre things about this cloth which I didn't understand, didn't make any scientific sense to me, and I decided to take a peek. Well, the peek became a 5-year project. Initially, the entire team approach, and there were 40 scientists in the team representing a large variety of disciplines. The basic approach was, what are we going to do if we have a chance to test this cloth? And obviously the reasonable thing to do was to test for a forgery, because clearly this is a relatively easy thing to do. If a white linen cloth had something on it, clearly it had to have some pigments or some stains or something of this nature. And these are the kinds of things for which there are all kinds of spectral devices in order to determine what kind of pigment was involved in making whatever was on the cloth, if this was indeed an artificial creation. So basically, the entire protocol for all the various scientists were oriented to trying to establish that this was a painting, an engraving, a rubbing, or whatever other method of image making there possibly was. You could hypothesize that it was a variety of things, and you could set up tests to determine whether or not this was indeed due to paint, stain, pigment, or whatnot. When you take a look at this, and may I have the only slide show, because the rest will, Dr. Adler will do. If you will take a look at the left, this one here. The shroud is 14 feet long. There you see the frontal image. Above, head to head, is the posterior image. If you take a look very carefully, you will see that it is a negative image, and that's what your eye sees. Now, this has been significantly enhanced. It has been enhanced because if you take the picture with a normal photograph, the image of the man is so faint as a yellow, a golden yellow, that it's barely perceptible. It's very difficult to see with the naked eye. If you are more than, let's say, 10 meters away, it disappears into the cloth. If you get too close, it disappears into the cloth. So in order to make the representation you can see on slide, it has to be enhanced. This stuff here on either side is the remains of a fire. And here, and the unusual thing about this image is that it is essentially a photographic negative. Dark is light, light is dark, left is right, and right is left. So if you take a negative of this picture, you'll see what you have over here, which is the positive image. There it's much easier to see a man with the hands folded across the groin. This is the frontal image, and that's the posterior image. First of all, let me tell you what the pathologists who examined this, and these were pathologists in very large hospitals such as County Hospital of Los Angeles, where they see an awful lot of mayhem. Several pathologists who took a look at this image and that image essentially said, well, from a pathological viewpoint, I can tell you what we see. And this is essentially what they said. They said there are holes in the scalp, punctate, which typically have bled a lot. The shoulders are scratched and swollen as though something very heavy was carried across them shortly before death. There are scourge marks that go down the back all the way to the ankles and are also anterior across the chest. These scourge marks have been fitted to a Roman flagrum, which is a whip with two thongs, at the ends of which were twisted pieces of metal to dig out flesh. Some of these have been dug up in Herculaneum, and apparently the lashes and the twists fit precisely into the scourge marks on that figure. There's a wound right there in the wrist. I feel the Department of Anatomy is a good place to point out that you cannot crucify anybody by putting a nail in the palm of the hand. There is not enough tissue there to hold the 70-kilo man, and the nail will pull through and it'll fall off the cross. If you really want to do a proper crucifixion, I'm sure you want to keep this in mind, you put the nail between the two bones here, and that will support the weight of the man. This is the way this man was crucified. There's also spike wounds in the feet. There is a wound in the side, and from this wound, a clear fluid came, and then a bloody fluid, red blood cells came. I'm not going to go into telling you why we know that this is blood. I'm going to leave that out. I'm just going to say that you will find that it is indeed blood, and that the blood is antibody-physiologic distribution. By that I mean you can see that when the blood, that the blood, the pre-mortem blood from the scourge marks on the chest, on the back, and on the legs show under UV. We didn't see this under ordinary light, but under UV you can see the plasma ooze at either side of the mark where there was a positive test report for the hemoglobin part, which is what you would see in an antemortem wound of this kind. Then when you take a look at the postmortem materials, such as the wound in the side, you see typical postmortem period. Now, what I didn't realize at the beginning of this work was that you have a separation, that certain kinds of violent death, particularly suffocation, results in a separation of the red cells from the clear elements, and you have a settling in the heart and the blood vessels, so that you have a supernatant of the plasma with the cells down below. Then if you take someone who has died a suffocation death, which gentleman across is, and you put a wound through the chest that's going to go into the great vessels of the heart, you will probably see first, depending on how you place the wound, the clear plasma coming out, followed by the serum coming out, followed by red cells, which are precipitated by gravity. So there is a lot about this from a pathological point of view, which somebody dealing with forensics and pathology would say, this is quite reasonable. Now, for those of you who've had any experience with clotting, you know that it would be impossible to paint a physiologic image such as this with blood from some other animal, because you would have, in order to have the clotting in the right circumstances and the failure of clotting, you would have to have a continuous supply of fresh blood, freshly drawn from a live individual. You'll find out that the blood here is, from Dr. Adler, is with greatest probability human blood. And I will say just one more thing about the image. The image of the man there defied all tests to establish any pigment, or any stain, or any molecular structure that was used from without. What caused the image there is a golden yellow color due to a process which affected the microfibrils in the linen. To give you an idea of what microfibrils are, if you consider your arm is a single thread of linen, the hairs on your arm are equivalent to the microfibrils which you see under the microscope if you put a piece of linen under the microscope. The yellow color is on the tips of those hairs. We're talking about something which is about 7 microns in diameter. Now, and of course the intensity of color is the number of tips of the microfibrils that are yellow. If you try to figure out a mechanism whereby a man could try to impose this on a cloth, you will find yourself making a pretty ridiculous scenario. Because basically, what you would have to postulate is that the artist, or whomsoever forged this, would have to be able to see microfibrils of that dimension, which of course requires a microscope. And then, in order to do it properly, you'd have to have that rigged to a color television set. You'd have to have a paintbrush which had one sable hair, perhaps, and be able to do one tip at a time, do it in reverse and backwards. I mean, the more you try to pump in as to how you would reproduce a thing like this, the more ridiculous it gets. We do not know how it's made. We do know that we can synthesize this golden yellow, but since we find no capillarity and we find a whole variety of other things which preclude any mechanism which we can reasonably think of, we don't really know how we could reproduce this image of a man or any other man, even there. Quite frankly, we do not know how the image got on the floor. This is after about 100,000 scientific man-hours with a team of 40, which is probably more scientific man-hours put on a single artifact than has ever occurred before in history, as far as I know. And yet, at the end of this time, we have to say that we don't know how the image got on there. It is not only our work, but we have various members of the team who lectured all over the United States at universities and scientific societies and abroad. And more often than not, the question is asked, if you've got any bright ideas, we'd love to be able to test them. Everything that has been suggested, no matter how bizarre, we've taken the bash at, and quite frankly, we haven't come any closer to it. So I'll finish up my part of this by saying that I don't know whose body lay in that shroud. I have no doubt that a human body lay in that shroud. I have no doubt that something was on the head which caused punctate wounds which bled. I have no doubt that something heavy was carried across his shoulders, which scratched and bruised him. I have no doubt that he was scourged with an implement identical to a flagrum. I have no doubt that he was crucified in a proper manner, and I further have no doubt that he had a post-mortem wound in the side. Now, you can put all those things together and you can reach any conclusion which you choose. I don't know who it was who lay in that shroud, but I have no doubt that it was a man who had the various stigmata that I just related. Now, as to the scientific method and the means whereby we identified all these things, I'll turn it over to Dr. Atta. He and I worked on this together over a protracted period. We were responsible for the blood work, as it were, and secondarily the chemistry. But he will then go into the details, and then you can quiz both of us. So.